At the stroke of midnight, the hammer fell. President Donald Trump, furious that his deadline was defied, unleashed a new wave of punishing tariffs on his closest ally. He expected a swift surrender, but from Ottawa, there was no panic, only a calm, calculated defiance. The tariff bluff, designed to bring Canada to its knees, had hit a wall. Data revealed the vast majority of Canadian trade was already shielded from the attack, making the threat largely hollow. How did the president's ultimate weapon explode right in his face? For generations, the US-Canada economic relationship was the definition of stability, a partnership so deeply intertwined that it often functioned as a single continental market. Trillions of dollars in goods and services flowed across the world's longest undefended border, built on a foundation of mutual trust and shared industrial logic. This predictability was more than a convenience. It was the essential bedrock that allowed businesses on both sides to build complex, cross-border supply chains with confidence. But this foundation of trust began to erode under the constant pressure of America First nationalism. The Trump administration reframed this historic partnership as a zero-sum game, viewing America's trade deficit with Canada as a problem to be solved with economic force. The first volley was a wave of 25% tariffs. When Canada, under its new Prime Minister Mark Carney, refused to yield and responded with its own retaliatory measures, the White House decided to escalate. President Trump set a hard deadline of August 1st, threatening to raise tariffs even higher. It was a classic power play, a high-stakes bet that the threat of economic chaos would force Canada to its knees before the clock ran out. As the August 1st deadline expired, President Trump made his move. It was meant to be the final, decisive blow in his economic war with Canada. He signed an executive order raising tariffs from 25% to a punishing 35% on all Canadian goods not explicitly protected by the USMCA. To prevent any circumvention, the order included an aggressive 40% surcharge on any goods suspected of being rerouted through other countries. This was the sledgehammer, but to justify it, the White House used a stunningly weak pretext, publicly citing Canada's alleged failure to curb the flow of fentanyl. It was an explosive claim designed to add political weight to the economic attack. The entire strategy was a textbook example of brinkmanship, a high-stakes bluff designed to create a crisis. The August 1st deadline was completely artificial, manufactured to instill a sense of panic in Ottawa and force a rushed, lopsided deal. To maximize the pressure, the administration deliberately made an example of Canada. While hitting its northern neighbor with the 35% hike, the White House granted Mexico a 90-day extension to continue negotiations, effectively trying to isolate Canada and break the North American front. The logic from Washington's perspective was simple and brutal. With nearly 3/4 of its exports dependent on the US market, Canada could not possibly withstand this level of targeted economic pain. The bluff was on the table, and the White House was certain that Canada's only option was to fold. But the bluff exploded the moment it was played. President Trump's hammer blow was met not with panic, but with a calm, strategic dissection that revealed his threat to be largely hollow. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government knew something the White House seemed to have overlooked. The USMCA, the very trade deal Trump had championed, was now Canada's primary shield. In a stunning revelation, data showed that Canadian businesses had been working for months to ensure their compliance with the deal's strict rules of origin. As a result, by the time the deadline hit, a staggering 90% of all Canadian goods exported to the US were already fully exempt from the new tariffs. The president's weapon, it turned out, was aimed at only 10% of the target. With the economic threat dramatically neutralized, Canada calmly dismantled the political justification. Prime Minister Carney publicly stated his disappointment, but refused to be drawn into a war of words. Instead, his government presented the facts, pointing to official data showing that Canada accounted for only 1% of the fentanyl entering the US, rendering the White House's primary pretext for the tariffs baseless. The response from within Canada was not fear, but a surge of defiant unity. Ontario's powerful premier, Doug Ford publicly urged Carney to hit back even harder, calling for 50% retaliatory tariffs on American steel and aluminum, demonstrating that the federal government had broad political cover to stand firm. Carney had successfully called the president's bluff, turning a moment of maximum pressure into a demonstration of strategic strength. Canada would not be rushed into a bad deal because it knew the bad deal it was being threatened with wasn't nearly as bad as advertised. The entire dynamic of the negotiation has been turned on its head. The tariff bluff has failed. President Trump, having played his strongest card and seen it rendered ineffective, now has significantly less leverage. He is faced with a choice: either escalate further, potentially in violation of the USMCA itself, or come back to the table with a more reasonable offer. Prime Minister Carney, on the other hand, has emerged with a stronger hand. He has demonstrated that Canada can withstand the pressure and has the legal and political tools to defend itself. The two leaders are scheduled to talk in the coming days, but the conversation will now be held on very different terms. The president's attempt to dictate the outcome has backfired, leaving him facing a neighbor that is not only defiant, but has proven to be strategically smarter. Even a successful bluff call comes with a cost. While 90% of Canada's trade is shielded, the remaining 10% represents billions of dollars and thousands of jobs in sectors like steel, aluminum, and softwood lumber. For these industries, the 35% tariff is a brutal reality. The ongoing uncertainty has created a chilling effect across the entire manufacturing sector, which has now been in a state of contraction for 6 straight months. Business owners, unsure of what the rules will be next month or even next week, have been forced to put investment and hiring on hold. This is the real-world price of the trade war, a slow, grinding erosion of confidence that stalls economic growth. However, this pressure is also forcing a long-term strategic shift. Faced with an unreliable partner, Canadian businesses are accelerating their efforts to diversify away from the American market. Recent data from Global Affairs Canada shows the share of exports going to the US has already dropped from its typical 76% to just over 68%. This is a significant change, a conscious decoupling designed to reduce Canada's economic vulnerability. The tariff war, intended to make Canada more compliant, is instead pushing it to become more independent. The short-term pain is real, but it's fueling a strategic realignment that may reshape North American trade for decades to come. The problem with a bluff, even one that's only partially effective, is that it still has real-world consequences. And in this case, they are ricocheting directly back into the American economy. For the 10% of Canadian trade that is hit by the 35% tariff, there is an American buyer on the other end of that transaction. For a US homebuilder, that means the cost of lumber has just shot up. For a US manufacturer, the price of specialized steel or aluminum components has soared. These are not abstract numbers. They are direct inputs that raise the cost of doing business in America. A 2025 analysis by the Brookings Institution warned that this exact type of tariff strategy ultimately reduces US growth, costs American jobs, and fuels inflation. The tariffs, therefore, become a direct tax on American consumers and businesses. Companies are forced to choose between absorbing the new costs, which hurts their profitability and ability to hire, or passing them on to their customers, which drives up prices and makes the American dream more expensive. This is the fundamental flaw in the tariff as a weapon strategy. The economic pain doesn't stop at the border. It flows through the deeply integrated supply chains and ends up on the balance sheets of American companies and the credit card statements of American families. The president's attempt to punish Canada has created a political problem for himself at home, as the cost of his bluff starts to show up at the cash register. A presidential ultimatum designed to be the final move in a high-stakes game has exploded in the White House's face. The tariff bluff was called, revealing the surprisingly robust legal shield of the USMCA and the calm, strategic resolve of the Canadian government. The result is a dramatic reversal of leverage, leaving an isolated President Trump facing a neighbor that has refused to be intimidated. The balance of power in North America has been unexpectedly and profoundly reset. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.